James Anderson adjusted his tie as he approached the entrance of Gourmet Heights, one of the city's most prestigious restaurants. His heart swelled with pride and anticipation. After months of relentless effort and dedication, he had finally won a landmark civil rights case that would change countless lives for the better. Just before reaching for the door handle, James paused, drawing in a deep breath. Memories of the journey that had brought him here rushed through his mind. Growing up in a humble neighborhood, he had always dreamed of making a real difference. His parents had instilled in him a profound sense of justice and the unshakable belief in standing up for what was right. Now, as a respected attorney about to celebrate a monumental victory, James was eager to bask in the rewards of his hard work. Little did he know that stepping through that door would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one far more challenging than he could have anticipated. What should have been a night of celebration would become the spark for an even greater battle for equality, a fight that would test his resolve, his compassion, and his ability to inspire lasting change. The only black employee at the restaurant greeted James with a polite smile. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "Yes, for the Anderson party," James replied in a steady, confident tone. As he was led to his table, he couldn't help but notice the curious glances from other diners. He was used to being one of the few black faces in places like this, but tonight he kept his head held high. He had earned his place here, not just as a customer but as a champion for equality. Seated at a corner table with a view of the city skyline, James unfolded his napkin and placed it on his lap. The weight of his recent victory settled over him like a warm blanket. He thought about all the people who would benefit from the case he had just won. Families that would now have access to better housing, children who would attend better schools, and workers who would be granted fairer job opportunities. A waiter approached, offering a menu. "Good evening, sir. May I start you off with something to drink?" James smiled. "Yes, I think I'll have a glass of your finest champagne. I'm celebrating tonight." As the waiter hurried off to fetch his drink, James allowed his mind to wander back to the courtroom. He recalled the tense atmosphere, the sea of faces watching as he delivered his final arguments. The judge's decision had been met with a mixture of applause and angry murmurs, but James knew deep in his heart that justice had been served. The champagne arrived, golden bubbles dancing in the crystal glass. James raised the glass silently, toasting to progress on the long road ahead. He knew that one victory didn't erase centuries of injustice, but it was a step in the right direction. As James savored his champagne, the restaurant's head of staff, a tall man with graying hair and an impeccable black suit, approached his table. The man's eyes swept over James, lingering on his dark skin with barely concealed disdain. "Good evening, sir," the head of staff said, his voice clipped and cold. "I trust everything is satisfactory?" James nodded politely despite the obvious tension. "Yes, thank you. The champagne is excellent." The man's lips pressed into a thin line. "I see. Well, if you're ready to order, I suppose I can take it," he said, his tone making it clear that this was an inconvenience. James felt a familiar ache in his chest, one he had experienced many times before. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of the victory he was here to celebrate. "I'd like to start with the lobster bisque, please," he said calmly. The head of staff scribbled down the order without a word, his pen scratching the paper with unnecessary force. When he finished, he looked at James again, his gaze filled with reluctance and judgment. "Will there be anything else?" he asked, his words more of a challenge than a question. James shook his head. "No, that will be all for now, thank you." The man gave a curt nod and spun on his heel, walking away stiffly. As he left, James overheard him mutter to another staff member, "Keep an eye on that table. Make sure there are no problems." The word stung, but James refused to let it dampen his spirit. He had faced far worse in his fight for justice. Still, he couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. Even here, in a place of supposed refinement and class, prejudice reared its ugly head. As he waited for his soup, James noticed that the other tables around him were receiving attentive service. Waiters hovered nearby, ready to refill water glasses or offer menu suggestions. His own glass, however, remained empty and no one approached to check on him. James sat patiently at his table, his fingers tapping lightly on the immaculate white tablecloth. He watched as the waitstaff moved about the restaurant, serving other patrons with warm smiles and friendly conversations. But when their eyes fell on him, their expressions cooled and they quickly looked away. He raised his hand, trying to catch someone's attention. A young waiter glanced in his direction, then promptly turned and walked the other way. James sighed, his heart heavy with a familiar disappointment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a waiter approached his table, his face tight with tension and hostility. "Yes?" the man asked brusquely, not bothering to make eye contact. "I'd like to order, please," James said politely, despite the waiter's rudeness. "May I see the menu again?" The waiter huffed impatiently. "Fine," he muttered, stalking off to retrieve a menu. When he returned, he practically tossed it onto the table before turning to leave. "Excuse me," James called after him. "I'm ready to order now." The waiter turned, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. James took a deep breath, remembering the countless times he had endured such treatment. He wouldn't let it ruin his night. "I'd like the filet mignon medium rare, please," he said calmly. The waiter scribbled down the order without a word and walked away, leaving James feeling invisible and unwelcome. While waiting for his meal, James noticed a couple at a nearby table signaling for service. Immediately, two waiters rushed over, fawning over them and offering recommendations. The stark contrast to how he was being treated was painfully obvious. Minutes passed, and James' glass of water remained empty. He watched as other patrons had their glasses refilled promptly, their needs met with enthusiasm. But whenever James tried to catch a waiter's attention, they quickly averted their eyes or pretended to be busy. The injustice of it all weighed heavily on James' heart. He had hoped that his recent victory in court marked a turning point, that things would begin to change. But here he was, still fighting the same battle, even in a place meant for celebration and fine dining. As James sat at his isolated table, a murmur of voices from the kitchen caught his attention. He couldn't help but overhear bits of conversation drifting through the swinging doors. "Can you believe he's still here?" a male voice chuckled. "Doesn't he know this place isn't for his kind?" a woman's voice chimed in, dripping with disdain. "I know, right? Who does he think he is, coming in here like he belongs?" Each word cut deeper than the last. James had faced discrimination before, but hearing such blatant prejudice in this supposedly sophisticated establishment left him feeling utterly disheartened. Another voice joined in, "Maybe if we ignore him long enough, he'll get the hint and leave." Laughter erupted from the kitchen, the sound piercing James' chest like daggers. He looked down at his empty plate, his appetite completely gone. The celebration he had envisioned for his hard-fought victory now seemed hollow and meaningless. With a heavy sigh, James pushed his chair back, standing up quietly. He adjusted his suit jacket and kept his head held high, despite the ache in his heart. As much as he wanted to confront the staff, to demand the respect he deserved, he knew it would only lead to further humiliation. Instead, he decided to leave in silence. His mind was already racing with ideas on how to address this injustice. He wouldn't let this experience break him. No, he would use it as fuel for his next fight. As he walked toward the exit, James caught the eye of the polite black staff member at the entrance, who seemed surprised to see him leaving so soon. Without a word, James gave a polite nod and stepped out into the cool night air. Standing on the sidewalk, James took a deep breath, letting the sounds of the city wash over him. Anger and hurt swirled inside him, but he refused to let them consume him. He had fought too hard, come too far to let this setback defeat him. When James arrived home, his shoulders sagged under the weight of the evening's events. He loosened his tie and sank into his favorite chair, the one that had supported him through countless nights of case preparation. The quiet of his living room was a stark contrast to the bustling restaurant, but the painful words still echoed in his mind. As he sat there, memories of past experiences with racial discrimination flooded his thoughts. He recalled the sting of rejection as a young boy, turned away from a community pool, the frustration of being passed over for promotions early in his career despite his exceptional work, the countless times he had been followed in stores, eyed suspiciously for no reason other than the color of his skin. Each memory added fuel to the fire burning in his chest. James had thought things were getting better, that his success as a lawyer meant something. But tonight's incident proved that prejudice was still alive and well, even in the most unexpected places. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and made a decision. This time he wouldn't let it go. He wouldn't silently accept the injustice. No, he would use his skills, his knowledge of the law, to fight back. "Enough," James said aloud, his voice firm and resolute. He stood up and walked to his desk, grabbing a notepad. Determination filled his eyes as he began jotting down notes, outlining the basis for a lawsuit against the restaurant. As he wrote, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was no longer just about him, it was about every person who had ever felt less than human because of their race. It was about creating a world where everyone could dine in peace, regardless of the color of their skin. "I will see this through," James promised himself. "For all of us who have been silenced, ignored, and disrespected. It's time for change, and I will be the one to make it happen." The next morning, James woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He called his trusted legal team, scheduling an urgent meeting at his office. As they gathered around the conference table, James shared his experience at the restaurant, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We're going to fight this," he declared, looking each of his colleagues in the eye. "Not just for me but for everyone who has ever been treated this way." His team nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting a mixture of anger and determination. They immediately began to strategize, discussing the best approach to building a strong case against the restaurant. In the weeks that followed, James and his team worked tirelessly. They pored over civil rights laws, examined previous discrimination cases, and gathered evidence. James knew that personal testimonies would be crucial in proving a pattern of discriminatory behavior. He reached out to community leaders and civil rights organizations, seeking their help to find others who might have faced similar treatment at the restaurant. Slowly but surely, people began to come forward. James sat across from Sarah, a young black woman who had tried to celebrate her college graduation at the restaurant. Her eyes filled with tears as she recounted her experience. "They seated us near the kitchen even though the dining room was half empty," she said, her voice trembling. "The waiter barely looked at us, and when he did, his face was full of disgust." James listened attentively, his heart heavy, but his resolve grew stronger with every word. He gently patted Sarah's hand, thanking her for her bravery in sharing her story. Next, he met with Michael, a successful businessman who had a similar experience. "I thought my suit and tie would make a difference," Michael said, shaking his head. "But they still treated me like I didn't belong there." As James interviewed more victims, a clear pattern began to emerge. The restaurant consistently discriminated against people of color, regardless of their attire or social status. Each testimony added another piece to the puzzle, strengthening his case against the establishment. Back at the office, James and his team meticulously documented each statement. They created a timeline of incidents, noting the similarities in treatment and the staff members involved. The evidence was mounting, painting a damning picture of the restaurant's practices. As James and his legal team filed the lawsuit against the restaurant, news spread like wildfire. Local media quickly picked up the story, and soon it gained national attention. Headlines read, "Prominent attorney fights discrimination," and "Civil rights champion takes on luxury restaurant." James found himself thrust into the spotlight, becoming a symbol of resilience and justice. His phone rang nonstop with interview requests from journalists eager to hear his story. He carefully chose which ones to accept, wanting to ensure his message was conveyed with accuracy and respect. During a televised interview, James spoke with passion and dignity. "This isn't just about me," he said, his eyes filled with determination. "It's about every person who has ever been made to feel less than human because of the color of their skin. We deserve better, and we will fight for it." As the story unfolded, public support for James and his cause grew exponentially. Social media platforms buzzed with messages of encouragement and solidarity. People shared their own experiences with discrimination, inspired by James' courage to speak out. As the trial progressed, James faced both overwhelming support and fierce resistance. The courtroom became a battleground of emotions and testimonies, with James standing firm at the center of it all. The defense attorney, a sharp-tongued woman in a pristine suit, did her best to discredit the witnesses. She questioned their memories, suggesting they may have misinterpreted innocent actions as discrimination. But James remained steadfast, his face a mask of calm determination. "Mr. Anderson," the defense attorney said, her voice dripping with skepticism, "isn't it possible that you were simply having a bad day and misinterpreted the situation?" James took a deep breath before responding. "No, ma'am," he said firmly. "What I experienced that day was unmistakable discrimination. It wasn't the first time I faced such treatment, but I decided that it would be the last time I stayed silent about it." His words reverberated through the courtroom, drawing nods of agreement from many in the audience. Even some of the jurors seemed moved by his sincerity. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered each day, holding signs that read "Justice for James" and "End Discrimination." Their presence lifted James' spirit, reminding him of the significance of the fight he was waging. But not everyone stood with him. Anonymous threats poured in, and he faced harsh criticism from those who accused him of exaggerating or seeking attention. These challenges tested his resolve, but he drew strength from the memories of his parents' teachings and the unwavering support of his community. Throughout the ordeal, James remained focused on the bigger picture. This wasn't just about him or the restaurant, it was about confronting a system that had allowed discrimination to thrive for far too long. With each passing day of the trial, the weight of responsibility grew heavier on James' shoulders. He was fully aware that the outcome of his case could set a powerful precedent for future discrimination lawsuits. Yet, instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt emboldened. This was his moment to make a real impact, not just for himself but for all those who had ever been subjected to the same unjust treatment. As the trial continued, media coverage intensified. News vans lined the streets outside the courthouse, with reporters jostling for position, eager to catch a glimpse of James as he arrived each morning. His story had captured the nation's attention, thrusting the issue of racial discrimination in high-end establishments into the public spotlight. James' calm, composed demeanor during press conferences and interviews won him widespread support. He spoke with heartfelt conviction about his experiences, never losing his composure, even when confronted with tough questions. "This case isn't just about me," James said to a group of reporters one afternoon. "It's about every person who has ever been made to feel less than human because of the color of their skin. We deserve better, and we're fighting for that better future." His words resonated with people across the country. Social media buzzed with conversations about racial equality and the pervasive nature of discrimination in everyday life. Hashtags like #JusticeForJames and #EndDiscrimination trended for days. Talk shows invited experts to discuss the case and its broader implications, and many people shared their own stories of discrimination, inspired by James' courage to speak out. The conversations were often uncomfortable, but they were necessary. As public interest in the case grew, so did the pressure on the restaurant. Once known for its stellar reputation, the establishment now found itself under fire, with former patrons expressing shock and disappointment over the allegations. Some even organized boycotts, vowing not to return until the restaurant addressed its discriminatory practices. Through it all, James stayed focused on the trial. He understood the power of the media spotlight but was careful not to let it distract him from the task at hand. Every day, he walked into the courtroom with renewed determination, ready to continue his fight for justice. During a break in the trial, James left the bustling courthouse and sought refuge in a nearby park. He sat down on a worn wooden bench, the same one he used to visit during difficult cases. The familiar surroundings brought him a sense of peace, and his thoughts drifted to his parents. James closed his eyes, almost able to hear the deep, reassuring voice of his father. "Son," his father would say, "no matter what life throws at you, always hold your head high. Your dignity is something no one can ever take from you." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves above him, reminding James of the countless nights spent on the porch with his mother. Her words echoed in his mind. "Perseverance is key, James. The road may be long and hard, but if you keep moving forward, you'll reach your destination." These lessons had been the foundation of James' life, guiding him through countless challenges. Now, as he faced one of the greatest battles of his career, their wisdom felt more relevant than ever. Opening his eyes, James looked around the park. Children played on the swings, their laughter carried by the wind. Nearby, an elderly couple walked hand in hand, smiling at each other. These simple scenes of everyday life reminded James why his fight mattered so much. He was fighting to create a world where everyone could enjoy these moments without fear or prejudice. As he sat there, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was more than just a trial, it was a step toward a future where dignity and respect were not privileges, but rights for everyone. James' phone buzzed with messages of support from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had been moved by his story. Each message was a reminder that he wasn't fighting this battle alone. His community had rallied around him, their collective voice growing stronger with each passing day. Drawing strength from this, James stood up, ready to return to the courtroom. The trial was far from over, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His parents' lessons, combined with the unwavering support from his community, had reignited his determination. As the defense attorney presented his counterarguments, James felt a brief wave of doubt wash over him. The attorney's words were smooth and persuasive, painting the situation as a misunderstanding rather than an act of discrimination. For a fleeting moment, James wondered if he had misjudged the situation, if his case wasn't as strong as he had believed. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes to momentarily block out the courtroom. In his mind, he saw the faces of those who had shared their stories with him. There was Melly, a young black woman who had been denied service at the restaurant's bar. He remembered the pain in her eyes as she recounted how the bartender ignored her, serving white patrons who arrived after her. Then there was Clark, an older gentleman who was seated near the kitchen despite the restaurant being nearly empty. His voice had trembled as he described feeling like a second-class citizen in a place where he should have been welcomed. And he couldn't forget Lisa, a successful businesswoman who was asked to prepay for her meal while her white colleagues were not. The humiliation in her voice was still raw as she recounted the experience. These stories, along with countless others, resurfaced in James' mind. Each one was evidence of the widespread discrimination that still existed. Each one reminded him why this fight was so vital. Opening his eyes, James felt his resolve strengthen. He glanced at the jury, seeing a range of emotions on their faces. Some appeared swayed by the defense's arguments, while others remained skeptical. James knew that his next move would be critical. As he stood to begin his rebuttal, a calm determination settled over him. The doubt that had briefly clouded his mind was replaced with a clear sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Melly, for Clark, for Lisa, and for the countless others who had endured similar treatment. Just as James was about to deliver his rebuttal, a commotion in the back of the courtroom drew everyone's attention. The judge called for order, and a woman in her early 30s, dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, made her way to the front. "Your Honor," James' co-counsel said, standing quickly, "we have a last-minute witness who has come forward. She is a former employee of the restaurant and has crucial testimony to offer." The judge raised an eyebrow, considering the request. After a brief discussion with both legal teams, he allowed the witness to take the stand. "Please state your name for the court," James asked, his heart pounding with unexpected hope. "Melissa Johnson," the woman replied, her voice steady but tinged with nervousness. "Ms. Johnson, can you tell us about your employment at the defendant's restaurant?" Melissa took a deep breath. "I worked there as a server for 3 years until 6 months ago," she began. As she spoke, the courtroom fell into a hushed silence. She detailed a pattern of discriminatory practices she had witnessed, and sometimes been forced to participate in. "We were instructed to seat black customers in less visible areas," Melissa said, her voice trembling slightly. "If the restaurant was full, we were told to tell them there were no available tables, even if that wasn't true." James listened intently, his heart heavy but his resolve strengthening. Melissa's testimony painted a damning picture of systemic discrimination that extended beyond isolated incidents. "Did you ever raise concerns about these practices?" James asked gently. Melissa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I did once. I was told it was just business and if I couldn't handle it I should leave. I needed the job so I stayed silent after that. But I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. That's why I'm here today." The defense attorney's objections were overruled, and Melissa's testimony continued. She provided specific dates, incidents, and even names of other employees involved in these discriminatory practices. As Melissa spoke, James saw the jury's expressions shift. The skepticism that had been present before was replaced by shock and dismay. Her testimony not only corroborated the client's experiences but unveiled a deeply ingrained culture of discrimination within the restaurant. As the trial neared its end, James and his legal team worked tirelessly to prepare their closing arguments. The long nights and intense discussions were fueled by a shared sense of purpose and the weight of their responsibility. One night, as they pored over documents and rehearsed key points, James' phone buzzed with an email from the National Civil Rights Coalition, expressing their support and offering additional resources for the case. James read the message aloud to his team, his voice choked with emotion. "This isn't just about us anymore," he said, looking around at the tired but determined faces of his colleagues. "It's about everyone who has faced discrimination and felt powerless to fight back." The team nodded, their spirits lifted by the reminder of their work's broader impact. They redoubled their efforts, refining their arguments and anticipating potential rebuttals from the defense. As news of the case spread, more civil rights organizations reached out with offers of support. Letters and emails poured in, each one a testament to the significance of their struggle. James pinned some of these messages on the office wall, creating a collage of encouragement that served as a constant reminder of why they were working so hard. One afternoon, while taking a brief break from preparations, R.A., a junior attorney on the team, spoke up. "You know, when I first joined this case, I was worried we might be in over our heads. But seeing all this support, it's like we have an entire community behind us." James smiled, feeling a wave of pride in his team and gratitude for the support they had received. "That's exactly right, R.A. We're not just fighting for ourselves or even just for the people who were turned away from that restaurant. We're fighting for everyone who believes in equality, fairness, and justice." The team's morale soared as they realized the true scope of their work. They were not merely preparing legal arguments. They were crafting a message of hope and change that would resonate far beyond the courtroom. The day of the closing arguments arrived, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. James stood at the podium, his heart pounding but his determination unwavering. He took a deep breath, looked at the jury, and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, James started, his voice clear and strong. Over the past few weeks, you have heard testimony after testimony about the discrimination that took place at the Starlight restaurant. But this case is about more than just a restaurant or a single incident. It is about the very fabric of our society and the values we hold dear. James paused, letting his words sink in. He could feel the weight of every gaze in the courtroom upon him. I stand before you not just as a lawyer, but as a man who has experienced the pain of discrimination firsthand. That night at the Starlight restaurant, I was not seen as James Anderson, a respected attorney celebrating a hard-won victory. I was judged solely by the color of my skin. His voice grew more impassioned as he continued. But my experience is not unique. You have heard from others who have faced similar treatment. People who were made to feel less than human simply because of their race. This is not just about hurt feelings or poor service. It's about dignity, respect, and the fundamental right to be treated equally. James walked slowly in front of the jury, making eye contact with each juror. The defense wants you to believe that this is all a misunderstanding, a series of coincidences, he said. But the evidence tells a different story. It speaks of a pattern of behavior, a culture of discrimination that has no place in our society. He paused again, letting the gravity of his words settle in. Today is not just about a restaurant or a group of people. It's about what kind of community we want to be. Do we want to be a place where people are judged by their character or by the color of their skin? Do we want to be a society that turns a blind eye to injustice or one that stands up and says, this is not right and we will not allow it? James' voice softened, but his intensity remained. I ask that you consider not just the legal arguments, but the human cost of discrimination. Think about the pain in the voices of those who testified, the dignity that was denied to them. And then I ask that you send a message, not just to the Starlight restaurant but to our entire community, that discrimination has no place here. As the jury went out to deliberate, James felt a surge of nervous energy. He sat on a bench outside the courtroom, surrounded by a group of supporters who had come to be with him during this crucial moment. The hallway buzzed with quiet conversation as people shared their own experiences with discrimination. An elderly woman with kind eyes placed a gentle hand on James' shoulder. You know, son, she said softly, what you're doing here reminds me of the battles we used to fight. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. James nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Thank you for being here, he managed to say. A young man in his 20s spoke next. Mr. Anderson, I faced something similar in a job interview last year. They looked at me and suddenly the position was filled. Your case gives me hope that things can change. As more stories were shared, James felt the weight of responsibility grow heavier. Each account of injustice, each tale of dignity denied, reinforced the importance of their fight. Hours passed slowly. James walked the corridor, his mind racing through every moment of the trial, every piece of evidence presented. Had they done enough? Would the jury see the truth? A young woman approached him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mr. Anderson, she said, her voice trembling, I just wanted to thank you. My little brother is watching this case closely. He wants to be a lawyer like you one day. You're showing him that it's possible. James felt a wave of emotion. He thought of his own journey, the obstacles he had faced, and the people who had paved the way for him. Now he was doing the same for others. As the tension in the hallway mounted, people spoke in hushed tones, nervously glancing at the courtroom doors. James tried to remain calm, though he could feel his heart racing. The tension reached its peak when the court officer emerged with the jury's verdict. With a deep breath, James walked back into the courtroom, his head held high. As the judge called the court to order, James took his seat at the plaintiff's table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. The room fell silent, heavy with anticipation. The jury returned with a unanimous verdict. The judge asked the foreperson to stand. Their voice was clear and strong. We have, Your Honor. James closed his eyes for a moment, sending a silent prayer. When he opened them, he saw the faces of those who had been with him throughout this journey, his legal team, the witnesses who had courageously shared their stories, and the supporters who had rallied around his cause. In the case of Anderson versus the Gourmet Heights restaurant, the foreperson announced, we find in favor of the plaintiff, James Anderson. A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom, followed by muffled sobs of relief and joy. James sat there, stunned for a moment, barely registering the words he had longed to hear. The judge's voice cut through the noise. The court orders the Gourmet Heights restaurant to pay substantial damages in the amount of $500,000 to Mr. Anderson and other affected parties. Additionally, the restaurant is required to implement a comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training program for all staff, to be overseen by an independent civil rights organization. As the reality of the verdict sank in, James felt a mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and a profound sense of responsibility. He turned to his legal team, tears shining in his eyes, and embraced each member. The courtroom erupted in applause, the sound of justice being served echoing off the walls. James was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support, seeing tears of joy on the faces of those who had shared their own stories of discrimination. Their hope for change was now a reality. News of James' victory spread like wildfire across the nation. As James stepped out of the courthouse, he was met with a sea of supporters, their faces glowing with joy and hope. The flash of cameras was relentless, and reporters clamored for a statement. James stood resolute, his voice steady as he addressed the crowd. "Today, we have taken a significant step toward a fairer and more equal society," he declared. "This victory isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who has faced discrimination and stood up against it." The media coverage was extensive, with news anchors and commentators praising James for his courage and persistence. Headlines across the nation proclaimed, "Civil rights attorney wins historic case against discriminatory restaurant." On national television, a respected journalist remarked that this decision sent a powerful message that discrimination has no place in our society, no matter how exclusive or sophisticated the establishment might be. Social media buzzed with activity as people shared their own stories of discrimination and expressed gratitude for James's bravery. The hashtag Justice Served became a national trend, with millions of posts celebrating his victory. Civil rights organizations hailed the decision as a landmark achievement. The president of the National Coalition for Civil Rights stated, "James Anderson's case reminds us that the fight for equality is ongoing and that one person's bravery can make a difference for many." In the days that followed, James received invitations to speak at civil rights events, universities, and even popular talk shows. He used these platforms to emphasize the importance of standing against injustice and working towards a more inclusive society. The impact of the case extended far beyond the courtroom, prompting restaurants and businesses across the country to review their policies and implement diversity training programs, eager to avoid similar lawsuits and create more welcoming environments for all patrons. Following the historic ruling, Marcus Blackwell, the owner of the upscale restaurant at the heart of the discrimination case, found himself at a crossroads. Once dismissive and defiant about James's claims, he now watched in awe as the nation rallied around the civil rights attorney. With each passing day, Marcus couldn't escape the overwhelming public support for James and the growing demand for justice. Everywhere he turned, he saw media coverage, social media posts celebrating the verdict, and passionate discussions about equality and inclusion. One evening, as Marcus sat in his dimly lit office, he picked up a stack of letters that had been arriving. With trembling hands, he opened them one by one, reading heartfelt accounts from individuals who had faced discrimination in restaurants like his. Their words pierced through his defenses, touching a part of his heart he hadn't known existed. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he realized the pain and humiliation his establishment had caused. The weight of his actions and the responsibility crashed down on him, and he knew he had to make amends. The next morning, Marcus called a press conference. As cameras flashed and reporters waited with bated breath, he approached the microphone. His voice trembled but was determined as he began. "I stand before you today to offer my deepest apologies to Mr. James Anderson and to everyone who has ever felt unwelcome or discriminated against in my restaurant," Marcus began. "I was wrong. My actions and the culture that allowed discrimination to thrive in my establishment were unforgivable. Today, I commit to making my restaurant a model of inclusion and respect." The room fell silent as Marcus outlined his plans for change. He announced comprehensive diversity and sensitivity training for all staff, the creation of a scholarship program for aspiring chefs from underrepresented communities, and a partnership with local civil rights organizations to ensure ongoing accountability. As Marcus spoke, his voice grew stronger, fueled by a newfound determination to be part of the solution rather than the problem. "This is just the beginning," he declared. "I invite Mr. Anderson and community leaders to work with us as we strive to become an example of what a truly inclusive establishment can be." James watched the press conference with a mixture of surprise and hope. He had never expected such a sincere apology from Marcus Blackwell, the owner of the restaurant who had once been his adversary. As Marcus outlined his plans for change, James felt a stirring in his heart, a desire to help make these plans a reality. The following day, James reached out to Marcus's office. When they connected on the phone, James spoke with warmth and sincerity. "Mr. Blackwell, I was deeply moved by your words yesterday. I believe in second chances and would like to offer my assistance in implementing these changes. Marcus was taken aback by James's generosity. His voice choked with emotion as he responded. Mr. Anderson, I don't deserve your kindness, but I would be honored to work with you. Over the next few weeks, James and Marcus met regularly at the restaurant. They walked through the dining room, kitchen, and staff areas, discussing ways to create a more welcoming environment for everyone. James shared his experiences and insights, helping Marcus see his establishment with new eyes. Together, they developed a comprehensive training program for the staff. James brought in experts from civil rights organizations to lead workshops on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. Initially wary, the staff soon embraced the opportunity to learn and grow. Inspired by James's dedication, Marcus went beyond his initial promises. He hired a diverse group of talented chefs and staff members, offering opportunities to those who had been overlooked in the past. The menu was expanded to include dishes from various cultures, celebrating the rich diversity of the city. As the changes took shape, the restaurant began to transform from a once cold and unwelcoming place into a warm and inclusive environment. Customers from all walks of life felt valued and respected. The restaurant had become a beacon of acceptance and diversity, embodying the very principles that James and Marcus had fought so hard to achieve. As news of the positive changes spread, James and Marcus found themselves in a quiet corner of the restaurant one evening, reviewing their progress. With tears in his eyes, Marcus turned to James and spoke softly, "I can't thank you enough for giving me this chance to make things right. You've shown me what true leadership and forgiveness look like." James smiled, his own eyes glistening. "This is what happens when we come together, Marcus. We all have the power to create positive change, no matter where we start." As weeks turned into months, the restaurant underwent a remarkable transformation. Once an exclusive establishment, it had become a beacon of inclusion and diversity in the community. James and Marcus worked tirelessly to implement comprehensive diversity training programs that went well beyond superficial changes. The initially hesitant staff began to embrace the new inclusive culture wholeheartedly. They engaged in regular workshops covering topics such as cultural sensitivity, unconscious bias, and the importance of creating a welcoming environment for all guests. These sessions were more than just lectures. They included interactive role plays and open discussions that allowed staff members to share their own experiences and perspectives. Inspired by James's dedication, Marcus took the initiative to launch community outreach programs. The restaurant began hosting monthly community dinners where local organizations representing various cultural groups were invited to showcase their cuisine and traditions. These dinners quickly became popular, drawing diverse crowds and fostering understanding among people from all walks of life. The staff's enthusiasm for these changes was evident in their interactions with guests. They took pride in learning about different cultures and cuisines, often sharing interesting facts with customers. The restaurant's core team, once dismissive of James, now greeted each guest with genuine warmth and respect. Some even began learning phrases in various languages to make international visitors feel more welcome. In the kitchen, Chef Miguel embraced the opportunity to expand the menu. He collaborated with local immigrant-owned businesses to source authentic ingredients and invited guest chefs from diverse backgrounds to create special fusion dishes. The restaurant's menu became a celebration of global flavors, reflecting the rich tapestry of cultures in the city. The impact of these changes resonated throughout the community. Other local businesses took notice and reached out to James and Marcus for advice on implementing their own diversity initiatives. The restaurant became a model of how a business can transform and positively impact society. As the team witnessed the positive changes and the growing sense of community within the restaurant, they began to embrace the inclusive culture themselves. They organized their own diversity events, such as cultural potlucks and language exchange meetups. The once cold workplace had evolved into a warm and supportive family where everyone felt valued and respected. The day of the grand reopening arrived, filled with anticipation and excitement. The community buzzed with curiosity, eager to witness the positive changes. James, dressed in his finest suit, felt a mixture of emotions as he approached the familiar building. He took a deep breath, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. As James walked through the doors, he was greeted by a sight that warmed his heart. The once cold and hostile space had been transformed into a vibrant celebration of diversity. Colorful artwork by local artists adorned the walls, representing various cultures and traditions. The air was filled with enticing aromas from dishes around the world. Marcus, the restaurant owner, rushed to greet James with a heartfelt handshake and a genuine smile. "James, we can't thank you enough for being here tonight," he said, his voice brimming with gratitude. You've helped us create something truly special. James looked around, observing the diverse crowd gathered for the event. People from all walks of life mingled, their laughter and animated conversations creating a joyful atmosphere. He spotted familiar faces, community leaders, civil rights activists, and even some of the trial witnesses. They nodded at him with respect and admiration. As James made his way through the room, he was approached by the restaurant staff who had previously treated him with disdain. Their eyes were filled with tears as they spoke. "Mr. Anderson, I want to apologize for how I treated you before. This experience has opened my eyes, and I'm deeply grateful for the chance to learn and grow." James was deeply moved by her sincerity. Placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, he replied, "Thank you. Your willingness to change is what makes all of this worthwhile." The evening continued with speeches from Marcus and community leaders, praising the restaurant's transformation and James's role in making it happen. When it was James's turn to speak, he stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, each different but united in the hope for a better future. As he stood there, he felt a wave of emotion. Clearing his throat, he began to speak, his voice firm and sincere. "Good evening, everyone. What we see here tonight is more than just a restaurant reopening. It's a symbol of change, growth, and hope." The crowd listened attentively, their faces reflecting a mix of pride, joy, and contemplation. James continued, "This journey has taught us all that when we come together against injustice, we can create real change." As he finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. Marcus then invited everyone to enjoy the evening and experience the new menu. The dining area doors opened to reveal tables adorned with elegant centerpieces representing various cultures. The staff, dressed in impeccable uniforms, moved gracefully through the crowd with professionalism. Saul, the head hostess, greeted each guest with a warm smile and genuine welcome, ensuring that everyone, regardless of their appearance or background, was seated comfortably and treated with respect. In the kitchen, Chef Maria, a talented cook hired as part of the restaurant's new inclusive hiring policy, expertly prepared dishes from various cuisines. The aromas of spices and herbs filled the air, drawing guests in. James watched as people from all walks of life sat together, sharing meals and conversations. He saw an interracial young couple being served by Tom, a waiter who had previously been indifferent towards James. Now, Tom was attentive and courteous, making sure the couple had everything they needed. At a nearby table, an elderly African-American woman was dining with her granddaughter. The woman caught James's eye and gave a nod of gratitude and understanding. James knew she had likely faced similar struggles in her life. As the evening progressed, the restaurant buzzed with lively conversations and laughter. The staff moved efficiently between tables, their faces showing genuine pleasure in their work. They took time to explain dishes, make recommendations, and ensure that every guest felt valued and respected. James felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see Marcus, his eyes shining with pride and emotion. "James," Marcus said, his voice thick with feeling, "look at what we've created together. This is more than I ever could have imagined." As the night drew to a close, James returned to the podium. The room fell silent, all eyes on the man who had made this transformation possible. James took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping over the diverse crowd before him. "Before we end this wonderful evening," he began, his voice warm and sincere, "I want to share a few more thoughts with all of you." James paused, gathering his emotions. "Tonight, we have witnessed the power of forgiveness and understanding. We have seen how standing up for what is right can lead to real positive change." He gestured towards Marcus, who was nearby with tears in his eyes. "Marcus and I started out as adversaries but ended as partners in progress. This journey has taught us that when we open our hearts to understanding, miracles can happen." The room was silent, waiting for each of James's words. It would have been easy to hold on to anger and resentment, but by choosing forgiveness, we've created something beautiful. A place where everyone is welcome, where dignity and respect are served alongside the food. James's voice grew stronger, filled with passion. "This restaurant is now a symbol of what is possible when we stand up for what is right. It hasn't always been easy, but it has always been worth it." He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as he could. "I want to challenge each of you to carry this spirit of forgiveness and understanding into your daily lives. Stand up for what is right even when it's difficult. Reach out to those who are different from you. Listen to their stories. Learn from them." James's words resonated deeply with everyone present. Many nodded in agreement, some wiped away tears. The atmosphere in the room was electric with emotion and shared purpose. "Remember," James concluded, his voice filled with hope, "change begins with each of us. Let's leave here tonight not just with full stomachs but with full hearts. Hearts ready to forgive, to understand, and to stand up for what is right. Together, we can create a world where everyone is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. As James finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. His words had touched something deep within each person present, inspiring them to carry the message of forgiveness, understanding, and justice beyond the walls of the restaurant. As the applause for James's special speech began to subside, a hush fell over the crowd. One by one, former victims of discrimination in the restaurant stood to share their stories. Their voices, once silenced by prejudice, now rang out with clarity and purpose. An elderly woman, her silver hair neatly tied back, spoke first. "I remember coming here for my 50th wedding anniversary," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "We were turned away at the door. Today I'm here, welcomed and respected. It's a beautiful change." A young man in a wheelchair rolled forward. "I was told they couldn't accommodate me," he shared. "Now look at the accessible seating and ramps. It's not just about race, it's about treating everyone with dignity." As each person spoke, a sense of unity blossomed in the room. Tears were shed, hands were held, and understanding deepened. These were not just stories of pain but testimonies of resilience and hope. A middle-aged woman stood, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I brought my daughter here last week," she said. "The same staff who used to ignore us now treated her like a princess. That's the power of change." The restaurant owner, who had been listening attentively, stood up. His face was marked by remorse and gratitude. "I don't have words to express how sorry I am for the pain my establishment caused," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "But I am incredibly grateful for this opportunity to make amends." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had shared their stories. "Your courage in speaking out and your willingness to give us another chance has transformed not just this restaurant but all of us who work here. We have learned that true hospitality means welcoming everyone with open arms and hearts." The owner turned to James, extending his hand. "Mr. Anderson, thank you for pushing us to be better. Your fight for justice has given us the chance to right our wrongs and create a place where everyone truly belongs." As James shook the owner's hand, a wave of applause swept through the room. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable sense of hope and unity. It was clear to everyone present that this was more than just a restaurant changing its habits. It was about a community coming together to build a more inclusive future. In the weeks following the restaurant's reopening, James and the owner, Marcus, found themselves deep in conversation about the transformative power of their experience. They realized that their story could inspire change far beyond the confines of a single establishment. "You know," Marcus said one afternoon as they sat in the newly renovated dining room, "I can't help but think about all the other businesses out there that might be stuck in the same mindset I was in." James nodded thoughtfully. "It's a widespread issue, but now we have a plan for change." This conversation sparked an idea that would soon blossom into a national initiative. James and Marcus decided to join forces, blending James's legal expertise and passion for equality with Marcus's business acumen and newfound commitment to inclusivity. They named their initiative Open Doors and Open Hearts, and set out to provide diversity training for establishments across the country. The program was designed to help businesses recognize and address unconscious biases, implement inclusive practices, and create welcoming environments for all customers. James took the lead in developing the legal and ethical framework for the training, drawing from his years of experience in civil rights law. Marcus focused on the practical aspects of implementation, using his restaurant as a case study to demonstrate the positive impact of inclusive policies on both the community and financial outcomes. The partnership, though unexpected, proved to be powerful. James's calm and articulate manner complemented Marcus's energetic enthusiasm, creating a compelling narrative of transformation and redemption that resonated with business owners across the spectrum. As news of their initiative spread, invitations began arriving from Chamber of Commerce business associations and individual establishments. James and Marcus found themselves traveling the country, sharing their story and leading workshops on inclusive business practices. In a small Midwestern town, they worked with a family-owned restaurant struggling with demographic changes. In a bustling city on the West Coast, they assisted a boutique hotel chain in reworking its hiring and customer service policies. Each workshop was a journey of discovery and growth. James and Marcus watched as skepticism transformed into understanding and understanding into commitment. They witnessed firsthand how their personal story of conflict and reconciliation could open hearts and minds. The transformed restaurant quickly became a beacon of hope and progress within the community. People from all walks of life flocked to the establishment, drawn by its reputation for excellent food and an inclusive atmosphere. The diverse mix of patrons created a vibrant energy, filling the air with laughter and animated conversation. James often found himself at the restaurant not just as a customer, but as a living testament to the change that was possible when people came together with open hearts and minds. He would sit at the bar, sipping an iced tea and chat with anyone who approached him, his warm smile and kind demeanor making him accessible to all. One evening, a young law student named Mara approached James hesitantly. "Mr. Anderson," she said with a slightly trembling voice, "I've been following your case and your work. You've inspired me to pursue civil rights law." James's eyes crinkled with warmth as he gestured for Mara to sit beside him. "I'm honored to hear that," he said. "Tell me what drew you to this path." As Mara shared her story, James listened attentively, nodding and offering words of encouragement. This scene became a common occurrence at the restaurant. Young lawyers and activists sought out James, eager to learn from his experiences and gain insights into the struggle for equality. Recognizing the impact he could have on the next generation, James began organizing regular mentoring sessions at the restaurant. He would reserve a large table in the corner, and aspiring changemakers would gather with notebooks in hand, ready to absorb every word of wisdom he had to offer. During these sessions, James shared not only the legal strategies that had proven effective but also the personal resilience needed to face adversity. He emphasized the importance of compassion even in the face of discrimination and the power of perseverance in the long fight for justice. "Remember," he would say, his voice full of conviction, "our goal is not just to win cases, it's to change hearts and minds. That's how we create lasting change." The restaurant became more than just a place to eat. It transformed into a center of learning and inspiration. Marcus fully embraced this new role, often participating in James's sessions to share his perspective on the business side of implementing inclusive practices. As the sun began to cast a warm, golden glow through the restaurant's large windows, James and Marcus stood side by side, observing the bustling establishment they had worked so hard to transform. The air was filled with the soft clinking of silverware, the gentle murmur of conversations, and occasional bursts of laughter. James turned to Marcus, a playful smile on his lips. "You know, when I first walked into this place all those months ago, I could never have imagined we'd end up here." Marcus nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and determination. "I'm grateful you gave me a chance to make things right. You could have easily dismissed me as another lost cause." James chuckled softly. "I've always believed in the power of second chances and the ability of people to change." They watched a diverse group of customers enjoying their meals, the staff moving among them with genuine warmth and respect. The scene before them was proof of what could be achieved when people came together with open hearts and minds. "We've come a long way," Marcus reflected, "but there's still much work to be done." James nodded, his expression growing serious. "You're right. This is just the beginning, but look at what we've accomplished here. It's proof that positive change is possible." As they stood united in their commitment to making a positive impact, a palpable sense of hope filled the air, as real as the aromas wafting from the kitchen or the smiles on the customers' faces. Ready to face the world, James extended his hand to Marcus. Marcus grasped it firmly, a look of determination in his eyes. "Together," James said, "I believe we can make a difference." As they shook hands, the setting sun bathed the restaurant in a warm, golden light, symbolizing the dawn of a new era of understanding, inclusion, and hope for a better future. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. See you in the next video.